Hmm.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show. I'm a big fan of trying to find good exploration companies when they're on the left side of the Lausanne curve for exploration success. And I've got the dynamic duo Rob McEwen and Ian Ball to join us today. They've got a new venture called Satori Resources that I'm quite excited to hear more about. So, Rob and Ian, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleased to be on. Thank you, Allan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Before we get started on the Satori side of things, I was thinking, Rob, you're a very astute observer and commentator on the markets, and we're going through a real interesting time. Just earlier today, before the market opened, J.P. Morgan took over First Republic Bank. And I think he might have had a bit of a Freudian slip in his quote. I'll quote him. He said, "This part of the crisis is over." And I think that's an interesting comment because I do believe that the banking crisis is far from over.
This part. So that suggests there are other parts still to be resolved.
Well, how can there not be, Rob? You've got 14 years of near zero interest rates, and then they jack things up to near 5% interest. They're breaking the banking situation, and I really think that they're close to ending the interest rate hikes.
Well, for a moment. I think interest rates they're going to go up again. But there's been some work done on when the Federal Reserve is raising rates and then pauses and then goes on to raise them further, where the price of gold and gold shares and precious metals start moving in those pauses because they see it coming down the road, further increases.
Right. And the reason for that, I think, is what's bullish for gold. I really think that right now we're in a situation where those that want to protect their money would be well placed into gold, and those that want to grow their money well placed into gold stocks.
Well, I won't argue with that.
Well, let's get on to the subject of the day, which is Satori. Ian, why don't you give us a little rundown of how this all came about?
No, I'd be happy to. And I guess about a year ago, Rob and I were speaking about the idea of forming a private exploration company, and we were able to acquire a number of prospective projects around some of the biggest mines and development properties around Canadian Malartic, Agnico Eagle's Hammond Reef, and Barrick's Hemlo. And then we saw an opportunity with Satori Resources to be able to combine the two entities, put in more equity. And what attracted us to the Satori story was this high grade at a former producing mine that ran in the 1980s that had been starved for capital, but had some very interesting drill results about 200 meters below the resource. And regionally, the property had not seen a lot of work, very little drilling, a number of high-grade showings. And so we thought, well, these are the opportunities that we like. Former producing mine, there is a permit in a good jurisdiction, there's high grade that's open, and there's blue sky on the property. So we thought, well, let's put them together, and they'd be very complementary.
So that's the Manitoba project, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you said it had a resource, Ian?
There is a small resource that's sub 300,000 ounces at about 7 grams a ton. They mined about 40,000 ounces historically. So there is ramp development down to 300 meters. There's a road into the project. There's power into the project. The mine has a license for 500 tons per day. So what we're trying to figure out is how can we upgrade that license? How can we maximize the 500 tons per day, looking at ore sorting technologies, looking at electric mining and hauling. Manitoba has some of the lowest power costs in Canada. So I'm saying, well, how can we take advantage of this underexplored camp that has high grade? Because it's really the high grade that's going to keep your financial footprint very small. If you can use a 500 ton per day, maybe you expand it to 1,000, your capital requirements are tiny, and it's much better to stay on budget, stay on top of personnel when you're not dealing with these very large projects. And you only have to look at the success of Alamos at Island Gold in Ontario and see what they were able to do there. And they now value that mine at about $3 billion Canadian. So you look at what high grade can do with a very small financial input. That's what gets us excited.
And that underground workings, would that enable you to easily test the depth potential?
So we're not going to be drilling from underground because you'd have to dewater those workings and provide ventilation. So we feel right now we can re-enter into some of the previous holes. And we can wedge off of them effectively. So we should be quite efficient drilling, even though it's from surface.
And what kind of a geological system is this, Ian?
Well, what you're looking at is like obviously very high grade veining. You are, looking at, you like to think it's kind of like, maybe you're looking in like a greenstone belt type of a setting. But there's a lot going on there because you also have Flin Flon with the 777 mine of Hut Bay, which was VMS.
Oh, okay.
So you have, this property has really not been explored for base metals. It's only been looked at for gold, and gold's our focus, but the geological setting, there's multiple areas that we could be looking at.
Sounds like it might have a bit of an orogenic gold system flavor to it.
Possibly. It's early days, but yes.
What are some of the highest grades that were intersected in that drilling?
So the last hole that they completed at 800 meters below surface was, give or take, 25 grams per ton over 12 meters.
Wow.
And so there's only one drill hole deeper, which was 9 grams over 3 meters. So it's pretty sparse drilling, but the system is wide open.
And that gets you at that almost 300 gram meters. That's a heck of an intersection. It's surprising that these kind of things were not followed up.
Well, they ran out of money. So that hole that we spoke about was drilled in 2021. The market was quite unfavorable for junior mining. And so they were not able to raise the capital to target extensions deeper than that.
Gotcha. So the structure of the deal gives Rob a very big position in Satori. Is that correct, Rob?
Yes, it does. 37.6% of the company.
You'll be a chief owner of a second company.
Well, I think we are at a phase in the market where one should be, well, at least Ian and I are looking at situations that have been overlooked, forgotten, but we're moving into a market I think is going to be very positive, as you said, for precious metals, and that there hasn't been much capital for this sector for a while, and those are ideal times to go shopping for opportunity.
I read somewhere earlier this morning that someone was saying that the risk is in the exploration, which goes without saying, but I think a bigger point that a lot of people are missing is that there's a lot of risk in the supply chain of several metals because of the lack of exploration.
Yes, that's becoming, it's starting to surface as a concern that people are focusing on this transition of energy to electricity is going to be a little more difficult than just flipping a switch, because these deposits, finding a deposit, then bringing it on stream so it's in production is not a 1 or 2 year exercise. It's maybe a 10 or 15-year exercise or longer. And the source of these metals, I saw a chart not too long ago, and it was showing the number of metals that America makes and contrasting that to what Russia and China make. And there's a huge difference. So if you think that geopolitical tensions are rising around the world and global trade patterns are fracturing, where are you sourcing your raw materials? And I was listening to something yesterday, and they were talking about a number of metals, and not only are they produced in China or other parts of the world that are a little more difficult, but China does a lot of the processing of a lot of the critical minerals that we need for this energy transformation. So that's one side that we might not be able to source, and the other is the sort of the power density of fossil fuels relative to solar and wind, that they're much lower. And there was one quote that there was something like 48,000, little over 48,000 power plants powered by fossil fuels or coal, oil and gas, and nuclear. And in order to get the equivalent power production out of renewables, you're looking at building over 580,000 plants. So not only are you going to need huge amounts of material to transition, but you're looking at time and capital.
You brought up something that is quite interesting to me as it applies to gold, is the fracturing of the trade throughout the world. These BRIC nations are seeming to be tired of selling all their products in US dollars that might have might be a little more volatile than they like, and that there's a currency war developing. And what I also find interesting about that is all the countries that are working on that that alternative currency to the US dollar are also backing themselves up quite significantly with gold.
Yes, you're seeing purchasing by central banks in Turkey and Pakistan, India, Russia, and China, although there were some sales recently noted in the press
From
that
Russia.
Russia sold a bit, and perhaps China. But
probably to fund the war that they're having with the Ukraine.
could be. Oh, but that's all of those reasons. If the dollar were to decline against other currencies, especially if someone could put a currency backed by gold forward, you might have a large migration of money to that currency at some point in time. It's not overnight, but it's one of these areas that just a gradual decline. And that helps precious metals.
These BRIC nations, they seem to be going on somewhat of a gold standard, and I think that might be a a play that investors might want to do as well.
Yes, very much so. And when they're doing that, they should be looking at the junior gold stocks that have just enormous upside leverage in a hot gold market.
And so, the valuations remind me a lot of the year 2000, Rob. You know, at that time we had gold was weak, the US dollar was strong, and the valuations of gold from the top down were quite undervalued. And we're at that point again. And after that, we saw a decade-long bull market for gold and gold stocks.
Well, that's what Ian and I see coming forward. Just looking ahead, that is going to be the case. And that's why we're putting money looking at overlooked stories that have a good margin with the high grade.
Ian, you got piqued my interest when you were talking about the Manitoba asset, but then all those other assets that Apollo had put together. Malartic is the largest gold mine in Canada, and you got some great addresses on the projects you had in Apollo.
Well, when you look at what we were trying to achieve there, first on Canadian Malartic, they found almost 16, 17 million ounces just in the underground there now at the underground extension. And they're finding a lot of that, 70% of that, out in the sediments. So we were able to acquire the property immediately attached to the underground project, where we have the same rock package that has never been drilled, but there are untested anomalies, as well as some pretty splashy copper results on the property. And then at Hammond Reef, we acquire properties north and south, and that's a project that is fully permitted by Agnico, but it's been stalled because of the economics. The grade is too low. So when we acquired it, the thought was, well, could we find a satellite deposit close to the processing plant that would be of higher grade? So we thought, well, we've been working in that area. We've identified a number of spots where we're finding better grades. Now they're over just rock samples, but they are running 2, 3, 4 grams a ton versus the sub 1 gram a ton that Agnico currently has to find. So that's what we've been trying to achieve there. And at Hemelo, people forget that Hemelo was first discovered because it was a placer mining area. And we have found 2 historical placer mines or placer operations on our property. So we're going to be following up on that as well. And so we're giving people a lot of optionality around big mines, higher risk, but then we also have the story at Tartan. So you have multiple opportunities here. And then I think the biggest change is obviously Rob's financial backing. A junior with no capital, there's no real optionality value there, versus you bring in someone with Rob's financial backing and the cost of capital goes down, the expiration goes up, and the ability to generate a return goes higher. So that's been a fundamental shift in the outlook for Satori, which is going to be renamed this week to Canadian GoldCorp.
Canadian GoldCorp. So it's got that GoldCorp flavor to it. I like that, because I remember the days when GoldCorp was really flying, hitting that high margin gold. And I still remember going to the PDAC and seeing the display with specimens from underground just riddled with gold. If anyone's ever had gold fever, that's the kind of rock that will do it to you.
Absolutely. It's very addictive.
So it really, as you were explaining it, Ian, it really sounds like the main focus is on high-grade gold with the newly named Canadian GoldCorp.
Yeah, we think there's a lot that can be done there with infrastructure, with efficient drilling, with the use of low-cost power in Manitoba, the permits, the team that actually already exists at Satori. So we think we're set up here quite well. And there's no telling what the drill holes will return, but when you have that type of intercept and you're drilling 30 meters away in your first test down plunge, the hope is that we'll be successful here. And then from that standpoint, we're now developing regional targets that we think could really build up the size of the resource if they were successful. But the initial program is on 10 holes down dip of the high grade.
And when you get those thick intersections of high grade, it's suggestive of a powerful gold mineralizing system.
Yeah, what was interesting to us when we looked at the story was that high grade intercept, what appeared to be in a completely different geological setting than what the Tartan mine had been historically. So there was no visible gold in that intercept, which was unusual for that type of grade. The thicknesses were much wider, and the core looked drastically different. And so we said, well, is this a game changer for this asset?
And to get those kind of grades in fine grained gold with no VG, that's a pretty exciting scenario.
Well, although visible gold is very nice, the one thing that it doesn't provide is it's much easier to steal visible gold. So if you don't have visible gold in the mine, that's also a security measure too.
Okay. You mentioned a couple things there that I wanted to touch on is the ability to raise money, cost of capital. When you made this announcement, Satori was only a couple pennies a share, and it's had a pretty good run since the announcement. Earlier this morning, it was trading at around 30 cents. And you guys are just sort of getting the ball rolling.
That's right. It's just starting. So drill season's starting almost after we speak. So there's enough money in the treasury to get the program going, and hopefully we'll get some more excitement and we'll put some more money in.
What is the treasury looking like?
Right now, it's about $2 million. And so we think we can execute on this 10-hole program at depth. We can better define the targets regionally. We can complete an ore sorting study, do the work on Hammond Reef and around the Hemlo properties. So that should be taking us, well into late summer, into early fall. And we want to deliver what these drill results could be before we go out there and raise capital.
The ore sorting really interests me. I spent a lot of my career in diamond exploration, and in diamonds, you do a lot of sorting. They're small and lots of value in those small, and they use X-ray sorting that pumps a little air in each time it sees a diamond. The diamond sector has been sort of a leader in that ore sorting. If you've got a high grade gold occurrence, that seems to be a natural fit.
We hope so.
I'm Cree. I'm Indigenous First Nations in Canada, and I'm Cree, and the Cree are a big part of Manitoba. How are your efforts going with your reaching out to the local Indigenous communities?
Well, I got the job last week, so I have to come back to you. But no, Satori and the former CEO, have been quite active working with the government, trying to source everything from Flin Flon, working with the stakeholders over an extended period of time with a very small budget. So basically, when you look at everyone who could have a direct impact on the operation, we don't focus on one particular group. It has to benefit everybody across the board. And so that when we talk about, building the mine of the future, it's how do you create the lowest environmental impact? How do you improve the economics regionally for businesses? How do you build up the local talent to work at the operation so they can increase their salaries as well? So and I think looking at what we've been able to do at McEwen Mining, some of the initiatives that we've been able to employ, we think we should be able to do here as well. But also creating a very good work environment. That's one of the things what we're looking at electric mining. It's not only the lower cost, but it's the lower noise, better ventilation because there's no exhaust underground. So how do you create an environment in a mine that people actually want to work at and be attracted to?
One of my soft spots in my heart is my great grandfather had a trap line for 60, 70 years. And I would often say to people in the mining sector, I really think the youth of the First Nations have a inherent talent. If you would have asked my grandfather and gave him a piece of rock, my great grandfather, and said, "Did you ever see something like this?" The memory is quite exceptional, and he would have probably taken you right to the spot where he saw that rock in the past. And I've kind of hoped that more companies will utilize the youth, Indigenous youth, because I think they're natural prospectors, and I think it could create some fantastic jobs So I'm happy to hear your efforts in that regard.
Well, I'm a big fan of prospecting. As Rob knows, I've spent quite a bit of time working with prospectors around the world, developing interesting bonus systems that led to one of McEwen Mining's discoveries. So I think in a lot of worlds, people look, professional geologists will look down upon prospectors, but they're the ones who are putting the boots on the ground, and you do everything you can to rise them up and saying, because their work is more important typically than sitting behind a desk.
Exactly. Well, I hope that you do a lot of that prospecting, and maybe you can get some of the youth out there and doing that old-fashioned geology, walking around and looking down at rocks.
Very much agree.
Excellent. Was there anything you guys wanted to close on?
Ian mentioned there's a name change coming later this week, but there's also a symbol change. Right now, Satori at one point played with the idea of becoming a cannabis company, so its symbol is Bud on the venture exchange. It's changing to CGC on the venture later this week.
Canadian GoldCorp. I love that name.
Yeah.
It's the revival of one of Canada's great gold mining companies that had tremendously high margins. I love that high grade, Rob.
Well, that's what we're aspiring to, Allan. We're not there yet.
Okay.
but I think as Ian mentioned earlier on, we're in a mining friendly jurisdiction in Manitoba. Power rates are on par with Quebec, so low. There's a road to the site, there's power to the site, there's a community in close proximity in a mining district. So, and it's permitted, and you have underground development already done. So it's not your average exploration project.
Having said that, Rob, earlier I talked about the Lassonde curve. And there's two exciting times in the Lassonde curve. One is in the exploration success. Then there's a long development discount window, and then another when you get into production. So what it sounds to me like is that it's on the left side of the first Lassonde curve, but that development discount window could be shortened quite dramatically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know at GoldCorp, that was something I was always fighting. I called it between those two parts where the curve is climbing, there's that valley of death. And we just kept our exploration going at GoldCorp to try to at least ensure we didn't fall into the valley of death. But it's there because you introduce all sorts of new uncertainties.
But you've got a bunch of assets or infrastructure that can narrow that development discount window, valley of death, down quite dramatically.
Yes, in theory, you could get into production fairly rapidly. And
as Ian was saying, it's still very early on the left side of the Lassonde curve, the first jump.
Yeah. Yes. So two double curves on the upside.
Ian, you had spent a lot of time working with Rob in the past with GoldCorp and then with McEwen Mining. Then you went into the royalty business for a while. Now you're coming back to the exploration and development of gold. Good on you.
Well, you want to look where people have made gains before. GoldCorp was high grade, Newmarket Gold in Kirkland Lake in Australia with Fosterville was high grade. It's when you can drastically change the grade that you're mining through an existing plant that you see that margin expansion, the rates of return increasing. So versus drilling low grade, which requires big capex, you don't see the same appreciation in stock price. And at the end of the day, that's why we're here. We're here to build, the best financial returns for the owners of the company. And that's always been with high grade.
Well, thank you guys very much. You've given me another company to follow closely. And, surprisingly, I'm finding a lot of companies to talk about. And when I can find a lot of companies to talk about, it's usually because there's a lot of undervalued stories out there, and we're coming into a better market. So I'm very pleased to have Satori and after the name change, Canadian GoldCorp to talk about.
Excellent. Thank you for your interest, Allan, as always.
Awesome. Ian, it's the first time we've met on one of these shows. I have met you in the past at the PDAC, but I can tell we're going to have lots to talk about with your new venture with Rob.
Let's hope so.
Well, the floor is always open for you guys to come on anytime you want.
Thank you, Allan.
I'm going to close it off. If you guys want to hang around for a couple minutes, I'll just close things off.
Very good.
So there you go, folks. As I said to Rob, I'm always looking for good exploration gold stories. I believe we're coming into a much more bullish market for these kind of companies, and they have put together quite a promising group of assets, and they still only have a $29.8 million valuation. It's early in the transition from Satori to Canadian GoldCorp. But so it might be a little challenging to do your homework on the company, but it sounds to me like they're going to have a excellent news flow going forward, and this is one you want to keep a close eye on. On that note, my shows are always for information purposes only. Important for you to speak with your financial advisors before making any investment decision. And I hope this is a great venue for you to come and follow the Satori story as it transitions to Canadian GoldCorp, and then transitions into getting work done on their various projects. On that note, have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.